A deadly assassin from the pits has joined the slew of heroes in flesh and blood. But before we get into her story as a cutthroat killer, let's first go back to her roots in the far-off land of Mysteria. This is a commoner deck guide for the new hero, Uzuri. Dragonfolk, here she is, Uzuri in all of her commoner glory. Welcome on in, everyone. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I know I am. My name is Alex, and you are here in the Dragon's Lair. Obviously, we love commoner here on the channel, and with Outsiders coming out in just about a week, I wanted to go ahead and give a little bit of some love to the new heroes that we're going to be seeing in Outsiders itself. So, of course, with none other than Uzuri being our very first one on the chopping block. Now, Uzuri does actually have a pretty cool ability, which we'll go over here to kind of give you a better idea of how she plays. Uzuri is a assassin hero with 20 life and 4 intellect, much like many of the heroes that you'll see in Commoner. The cool thing about Uzuri, though, is she's got this pretty cool attack reaction step here. I'll kind of put it in layman's terms, since a lot of people getting into the commoner format may just be learning the game or brand new to the game. Essentially, what she can do is she can take any card with the term stealth, which is located in cards like this, for instance, for infect. This stealth keyword right here. What she does is during the reaction step of your combat, after your opponent has chosen blocks, you can choose to take a card with cost 2 or less and essentially replace this stealth card with that card. No cost necessary, nothing at all. The only cost is that you have to banish it from your hand, and then you flip it face up to reveal that it's the card that it is replacing. And then you replace the stealth card with the card from your hand that costs 2 or less. This allows her to essentially replace the stealth cards with cards that have a very high power or a pretty interesting on-hit ability. So, of course, you have Infect, which is a 3 cost. A lot of these stealth cards come in for 3 attack and block for 3, which is super, super cool. We like having our cards block for 3. And it costs 0. And what you would do in a situation, you can replace it with a card like Stony Wootenhog, which costs 2, comes in for 6, and if it's defended by less than 2 non-equipment cards, it has +1. So, technically 7, unless your opponent decides to de-react on top of that, or provide some other blocking effects to pretty much bring that down to 6, but it's still 6 nonetheless. So, something that's really cool about Uzuri and Commoner is that practically none of that matters. And what I mean by that is that Commoner does not actually have a lot of very good 6 power, 2 cost cards that have really cool on-hit effects. A lot of those cards ended up sinking into the rare rarity as opposed to the common rarity. And there are some cards that kind of tease their way through, and there was an issue with Death Touch for a little while, where Death Touch, being a rare card, was able to be put into these commoner lists. That has soon been fixed. And now we see what the actual outcome is. So unfortunately, in Commoner, her hero ability can still be utilized, but not by many cards. There are a couple of cards that could very well be used in a pretty awesome manner. For instance, Stony Wootenhog, right, is able to come in for 7, 6 at most if they've double blocked. Virulent Touch, being a 0 cost 4 attack, is actually one of the better cards in this deck. Virulent Touch allows us to essentially swap out the stealth card with a Virulent Touch if they blocked. Don't ever block this out with Virulent Touch if your opponent has not blocked. If your opponent hasn't blocked, don't attack react into a Virulent Touch, because you don't get its awesome effect, saying that when the chain link resolves, if Virulent Touch is defended by a card from hand, so you have to make sure it was a card from hand that they did defend with, you create a Bloodpox token under their control. So that is a cool way to essentially sneak damage through. In most cases, your opponent will not be paying to get rid of the Blood Rot Pox, which is 3 resources. So because of that, you get a free 2 damage off of a fully blocked attack, therefore sneaking just a little bit through to kind of help out with everything. So without jumping through too much, essentially I wanted to get through her kit and show off what she's got here. So we have Uzuri, our hero. Then we have Blossom of Spring. Blossom of Spring is a pretty awesome chess piece. I'm not sure whether or not it's the chess piece I want for here. A lot of our stuff comes in for free, pretty much. The only thing we're really paying for these days in this deck is our Spider Bites. Spider's Bite is the weapon for Uzuri, and you got to run 2 of them. It's just really, really good. In theory, you could run 1 and then like an Arcane Lantern if you're going into a wizard build or some kind. But 2 is really great because, believe it or not, this card actually does a lot of work. Then we do have a Hope's Merchant's Hood, and to be honest, I don't often run this. I kind of have it in here just to hold a slot. This essentially allows us to mulligan our hand. Let's say, for instance, we get a handful of stealth cards, but no attack reactions or, powerful 2-cost cards to replace the stealth cards with. You can always Hope Merchant's Hood. But in most cases, I'm running Iron Rot Helm because it blocks for 1, and when the meta is a lot of physical damage aside from Icelander, you're going to want something like this. Iron Rot Legs, pretty standard. Iron Rot Plate, same deal, pretty standard. Spring and Plate are both very hit or miss. I like Spring if I know I'm going to be able to do a lot of damage to my opponent and them not block anything, or if I know that my opponent can only do little chip damage, as opposed to Iron Rot Plate, whereas I play that into Guardians and I play that into Rangers and so on and so forth, and you'll see that later on in these games. So then our AB package is Null Rune Gloves and Null Rune Hood. Those are pretty straightforward. We want to have AB for those wizard matchups. We don't want to go in there without any AB. We will surely die. Snapdragon Scalers is great because Uzuri, being an assassin, assassins don't normally have a lot of natural go again on their cards. So being able to come in with an attack and then have them, block said attack, and then you can Snapdragon Scalers to come in with something else to maybe give a Blood Rot Pox token or a Frailty token. Those are going to be very important going into the matchups. We've also gone over the Spider's Bites. Again, this is really, really good because it's got piercing. Most of the time, your opponent will be blocking with armor. Armor is a very good resource to use in Commoner, especially with that Iron Rot. If they block with an Iron Rot to block a Spider's Bite, you actually get a bonus to your attack. So it'll come in for 2 as opposed to 1, therefore still getting the hit. And when this does hit, the next time they defend with 1 or more attack action cards this turn, those cards have -1 while defending. So essentially, removing the block value of a good portion of your opponent's cards is good, especially since you want to sneak in that extra damage when you are switching out your cards. And then instead of running the Iron Rot Gloves, I actually ended up running the Toxic Tips. I feel like it still blocks for 1 and has Blade Break, so it does practically the same thing. And it, of course, gives you an option, if you have the opening, to pay a resource to destroy this and then make the next attack action you have. Essentially, give your opponent a disease of any sort, whatever you want. So if they have stuff in Arsenal or they play a lot of things in Arsenal, you can give them an inertia token. If they play a lot of things with their weapons, like they attack with both of their weapons almost every turn, hit them with a Frailty token. Usually that's with like ninjas. And Frailty also helps with Rangers too, because Rangers do attack from Arsenal. It also gives their stuff from Arsenal -1, but in most cases they're buffing their stuff, so the -1 is not going to be really that great. In most cases, you're going to use this against Ninja. And then Blood Rot Pox, again, nobody's going to pay that 3 resource cost, except for maybe an Icelander or somebody who plays a ton of blues and has nothing else to do with that card in their hand. So they'll usually just take that 2 damage. Now, moving on to the main board. So the main board here, we have a pretty straightforward and simple thing. I wanted to make it mainly stealth-based with the diseases, but I found that to actually not be super great. I tried initially doing a just stealth into attack reaction based turn, like do that every single turn and you'll never lose. It didn't exactly work out in my favor. It was slow, clunky. I felt like I needed more cards in my hand than what it was worth. I have yet to try out a pummel version, but you can only run so many pummels, and I'm not sure whether or not it is truly worth it or what the general idea behind a pummel version of this deck is. If you have any idea how to play pummel Uzuri in Commoner, feel free to let me know. But we are sticking with some old favorites from Dynasty. We are still sticking with a lot of these contract cards. Luckily for our opponent, these contract cards do not work the same as they would in Arachne from Dynasty, Arachne Huntsman, because we don't get the Arachne ability to look at the top of our opponent's deck and choose whether or not to put it at the top or at the bottom. Luckily, we do get that with the attack reaction of Cut to the Chase. This is an attack reaction that's just going to buff a card with contract. And all of our contract cards come in for 4 damage. It's a 0 for 4 with no go again. So it's on rate. It's just like playing Snatch, except you get to banish the top card from your opponent's deck. It's very, very powerful, especially in Commoner. A lot of people tend to go through their decks very fast. You have Dash and Kasai being huge into the meta. So seeing things like that is actually a big deal. And you're going to want to make sure to get over that. 0 for 4, even if they leak one of that damage through, they are in fact going to be, banishing a card. And the silver you get from it, don't worry about it. It just exists there. You don't have to worry too much about that. Use it if you have it and you have nothing else better to do. But for the most part, you're just gonna make sure that you have these cards for damage, not so much for their ability to generate silver. Then a big tech into this deck is Inertia Trap. Inertia Trap is pretty awesome. When this defends an attack with attack greater than its base, you create an Inertia token under the attacking hero's control. Inertia, again, at the end of their turn, they take all cards from their hand and arsenal and put them on the bottom of their deck. So it's really good into Rangers because Rangers do get to buff a lot of their stuff. It's really good into any decks that run attack reactions, any decks that care about arsenaling. Even when an Oldhim comes in with the Titan's Fist, that is, as long as they've gotten that buff on there to give it that +1, Inertia Trap will trigger and it will allow them to not be able to arsenal for that turn, giving you a good place to start. The same goes with Wounded Bulls for Icelander. This is huge into Icelander. If Icelander tries to hit you with a Wounded Bull and you Inertia Trap them, they're not going to be able to arsenal on that turn, and you're going to be able to go whole hog into them with your Snapdragon Scalers and your 0 for 4s that banish and your Infect tokens and so on and so forth. So it's pretty cool. So then moving on to Infect, I have Rainbow Infect here, red, yellow, and blues. These all just, if they hit, they create a Blood Rot Pox token. In most cases, you're swinging with the reds and the yellows, and then the blues are getting pitched. These both really can be pitched. I like blues and yellows to be pitched more so than anything, and then attacking with reds first. Same goes with Isolate. Isolate is a pretty cool stealth card that has Dominate. So you can essentially play the dominated card, and they can only block with 1 card from hand. Luckily for them, it's a 3 attack, so any card from hand can block it. But you do also have awesome cards like Nimblism, which do buff your cards. So if at any point you even have like a double Nimblism into an Isolate, that is 9 damage dominated for free, pretty much. I mean, it costs you 3 cards, but 9 damage dominates pretty cool. On top of that, also, we have Razor's Edge in red and blue. This, again, is a attack reaction that gives our stuff with stealth +3 attack. So you're going to want to use that specifically on stealth cards. You cannot use these on contract cards, and Cut to the Chases cannot be used on stealth cards. So just make sure that if you can pitch stack them correctly to make sure that you have any of these contract cards with your contract buffs and your stealth cards with your stealth buffs, it should work out fine for you. Also, not to mention that Nimblism plus any of these 0 for 4 contract cards is a 7 breakpoint. It comes in for 7 power. So a 7 breakpoint is pretty heavy going into commoner. So a lot of people will be very, very scared about that. So keep that in mind if you're saving these nimbalisms for anything. Save them for these isolates to kind of end out the game, or you can hit them with the fleece the frails, the sack the shifties, and the slay the scholars, and it'll have use for that there. Then again, like I said, sack the shifty, slay the scholars, 2 more of these 0 for 4 contract cards. The point is just to hit them with a breakpoint. If you come in with a spider's bite, and then breakpoint, it tends to be enough to kind of start picking stuff out of their hand. Even if it's just 2 cards, they tend to be able to really fear that kind of stuff, especially if they let any of those spider bites through. It does, of course, reduce the cost of their defense values for their attack action. So it is important that you get the spider bites off. I'm running 2 Sink Belows. I know I'm not sure whether or not I want to keep them. I like them in here. Obviously, Sink Below is huge into a commoner meta, but the amount of times it's been super useful hasn't always been true. But I mean, blocking for 4, it's good going into Dash. It's good going into Kasai. It's good going into pretty much anything besides a wizard. And I'm talking like only Kano though, because Icelanders are still running Wounded Bulls. So it very well could see use there, but very situational. I like it still. It's a defense reaction. You got to play D-Reacts in Commoner. That's just how it is. Again, Stony Wootenhog is our attack reaction hero ability target, where we bring this in for 7, and then they usually attempt to block with 1 more. Because if they block with a 3 block initially on your stealth card, and then you switch it in with this, it'll have a 7 power, and then they can use a D-React or something to block 4 more to block the whole thing. The unfortunate part about Stony Wootenhog is there's no real scary on-hit ability. I thought about, the sad part is you can't use Toxic Tips for something like that, because it's the next attack action you play this turn gains this, which means that when you attack with a stealth card and you activated Toxic Tips previously, even if the Infect card gets put to the bottom of your deck due to Uzuri's ability, the Toxic Tips effect is tied to that Infect card, not the card that does the damage. So unfortunately, it is not really super useful in that matter to give it a relevant on hit, and it just kind of does damage. But getting another D-React out of their hand or their arsenal is pretty good. You kind of want to run them through all their D-Reacts super quick so that you can just kind of come in with poke damage with your spider's bites, and that tends to be enough to do the job. Virulent Touches, again, I'm running the blues and the reds. This is an Assassin Ranger action, so it can be used in either or. It can't be played from hand, but it's really, really good because, of course, if you switch this out with Uzuri's ability, even if it's the blue one, you don't even need to deal damage. As long as it's been blocked with a card from hand at any point, whether it be a D-React or just a regular action from hand, you will get the Blood Pox on your opponent's side of the field. So very good way to sneak in 2 damage. 2 damage is a decent amount comparatively in Commoner. So that is something to look out for. Usually your opponent's trying to play their entire hand, and this is kind of the way around that. And then Wither. Wither is our frailty token stuff. Now you see, I didn't keep the stealth cards in for Inertia to date, simply because I don't think that it's super relevant. You see Wither and Blood Rot Pox be more effective in the Commoner meta than you do Inertia sometimes. Inertia is really situational because in order for it to give a Inertia token, you have to essentially make sure that your opponent is in fact going to either block it or they're going to arsenal, right? You don't want to waste an Inertia token, and your opponent can just throw their whole hand away in an attempt to make it really, really worth it anyway. It's hard to determine when the Inertia tokens are important. I like these frailty tokens because what they do is they remove a lot of power from the weapons that are played in Commoner. So Ira, her weapons are going to get -1 the whole way through on that turn. You have Katsu doing the same thing, Fi doing the same thing, even other assassins doing the same thing. As long as your weapon hits, Kasai getting minus. You have Dorinthia getting minus stuff. Bolton getting minus value on his weapons. It's very relevant unless you're going against an illusionist. And at that point, it's 3 damage that you're hoping to sneak in. Sometimes the cool thing about this deck is that your opponent is just going to assume that you are going to switch out the card. So they don't normally block. And sometimes they assume that you have a virulent touch and they won't block. And at that point, you can just wait. Just come in, attack for 3 or whatever, and then deal damage, and then just, if they don't block with anything, just arsenal this. And then you can just attack with it after you've double spider bite the next turn. Or same deal goes with any of these fleece the frails and sack the shifties. Like, as long as you're trying to spider's bite the most, that's really what's important. The spider bites are probably the most important part of this deck, and it's very strange to say that, because with this ability to essentially run down their defense from their attack action cards, this really does put a hamper on their whole game plan if they let any of these through. More specifically, if they let even one through. If they block the second one when you come in for the first one, or you assume they're going to block the second one when you've been successful with the first one, then I would say just use one and then attack with a card, because at that point you can do something like, if you really wanted to, you could Snapdragon Scalers or something of the sort. These spider bites have put in a lot of work, but not enough work for me to want to instead switch this out with Blade Cuff, because I feel like it's just not enough yet. But of course, more testing down the line. I have only done a few matches. I have a 47% win rate on Talishar, which is like nothing, really. Like, in all retrospect, I have 17 matches. A lot of these were in testing over time. So it's probably like 10 wins out of 17. But overall, it's a very, very good, solid deck for Commoner. It does not focus so much on Uzuri's ability, and I'm debating on whether or not I just want to omit the use of Uzuri's ability at all in this deck, but she definitely has some legs. I think the addition of these diseases certainly do a big number on the Commoner format, because when you get an inertia token and you are somebody who is saving your cards in hand for Arsenal and you can't use them, right? If you're going up against a Guardian who can only do one thing a turn, you're winning. Like, that's pretty good to stop them from having anything in Arsenal. And then you can come in by buffing your stuff with Nimbleisms, buffing it with Cut to the Chases or Razor's Edges, and then just being able to come in for 7 to possibly 10 damage with any of these contract cards. That's like half their life. That's a lot. So keep that in mind. And of course, there will be a video coming up in regards to how the deck is run. I'm going to go ahead and split this up into a deck idea and then a gameplay video, or a deck tech and then a gameplay video. So keep an eye out for the gameplay video when that comes out. Should be very soon after this releases. And more importantly, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think this deck could use. I am very, very meh as far as deck building is concerned, and I certainly love trying out new things. So if any of you guys have any recommendations as to how this deck could be better, feel free to let me know. I'd suggest maybe watching the gameplay video first before going further. But Uzuri is a very fantastic hero into Commoner, even though a lot of her really powerful 6 attack cards are not available in this format. There are some that are notable mentions, such as, I want to say, let's take a look at this. You've got, I want to say it was Demolition Crew, which is something I thought about. Demolition Crew, yeah. So this is really, really good because You don't have to pay the additional cost to bring it in. It comes in for 6 and it has dominate. So your opponent already can't play anything. You're sneaking in 3 damage there. I thought about switching that out with Stony Wootenhog to at least guarantee more damage at that rate, as opposed to having them have to use another D-React. So Demolition Crew is an option. There's also another one I've been toying with, which is Surging Militia. This is a +1 for each non-equipment card defending it. It comes in for 5. If it's blocked already, if your stealth card's already blocked for 3, you can bring this in, and this will technically come in for 6. And then if your opponent wants to play a D-React, it'll be 7. So fully blocking out the entire thing and ripping 2 cards from your opponent. I don't know what's more important in this case, right? Because you have the contract cards in which you can banish things. But you also do want to strip cards from your opponent's hand, especially the D-Reacts, so that you can come in for those really, really powerful attack reaction or nimblism turns when your opponent has next to nothing left. So again, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think. Love to hear from you. While you're down there, make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel as well if you haven't already. We do a lot of these commoner deck techs here. I do hope to bring her into Clash at some point as we move forward, but I wanted to perfect her commoner build first and get a really comfortable situation down for her before I decide to move on to Clash. And I feel like I'm that way with every hero. So keep an eye out for the gameplay video that's soon to come out. You can also check out our Patreon and channel membership here on the channel. I certainly appreciate any support you guys give me, whether it be monetized or not. So thank you all so much. I appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon. Nerd out.